These are animals.
You cannot do it.
These are people.
What if you weren't really seeing the whole story? What if we're not trapped, but we're being reminded of how precious liberty really is? What if in the midst of all the darkness, we're getting a chance to shine brightly together? What if we weren't really divided? What if we were becoming united again? Let's tell the whole story of who we really are. The America, where we learn new things together, where we build new things together, where we are revitalized, redeemed, and restored. I'm Jade Simmons, and I'm running with you so that we can finally become who we've always said we've been. One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all, for real.
I'm Jade Simmons, a candidate for President of the United States, and I approve this message.
Hi, everyone. Good evening. Jade Simmons here, your one and only truly serious independent candidate for President of the United States. We are so happy that this is a season for us to be fulfilling the promises that we've set out. One of the early promises we made was that we would do whatever it took to stay standing and to be viable all the way until November 3rd, and we have done that. We're so proud that we're available in the majority of states. We are in line to grab more than 270 electoral votes, just like the other candidates. So we fulfilled that part of the journey, and we're so proud that so many of you have been rushing to the polls, sending us pictures of your ballots as you've been writing us in some states and able to bubble us in others. So we thank you for the faith that you put in us. Part of the faith that we've been looking to rebuild is faith that leadership can still be a place where service emanates. And so one of the things that we are vying for, myself and Claudelia Rose, my running mate, is that we want to be a powerful example of what servant leadership looks like. And in order to be a true servant leader, you have to look at the job and the role of serving as many Americans as possible. And so one of the things that we've set out to do is to look at how is it we would serve humans who are in different walks of life, different locations, different situations, different socioeconomic statuses. How do we look to serve that powerfully? If you haven't noticed, there is a conversation that has been woefully missing from our political conversation, the rhetoric, the narrative that we've been seeing over the last few months. We've been running since January, and we still haven't heard a strong voice come forth and really speak in terms of how do we help the more than, I think the number is more now, but at least 38 million people who are living below the poverty line in our nation. How do we help these continually impoverished groups that seem to never get a leg up? How do we help these groups? And one of my reasons for believing we don't hear that discussion is because those simply aren't the people that are going to the polls. Well, we have to have an era of leadership now that serves people regardless of whether or not they vote for you, regardless of whether or not they have even the brain space, the mindset to think about going to the polls when they're still worrying about putting food on their tables. Tonight, we're having a special town hall. I talked about promises being fulfilled. I had the honor of meeting two gentlemen a few months ago, and the work that they do in this area of really studying what it would take now to help Americans, people all over the world, really, but especially in their own communities, be able to begin now to build a pathway out of poverty. That's what we're going to be talking about tonight. I am proud that it is the last town hall that we're having. We believe at Operation Restoration that those who have been last, it is a season for them to be first. And so I'm excited that there are guests that I'll be bringing on tonight who are part of what I call America's best and brightest. These are the types of people who are advising us behind the scenes. They will be advising us in our administration. Why? Not just because they know the subject matter, but because they live the subject matter. You're going to meet people tonight who choose to live in the spaces that they serve, who choose to not separate themselves from the matters at hand, who choose to get their hands dirty and to really be a part of the solution and not just be off to the side pontificating about proposals and policies. So we're excited to bring you these guests tonight. You'll hear us speak about poverty and the ways that it ties in with education. we always think that this is a discussion solely about money, and you better believe that there is green needed on the table to solve many of these problems. But this is an issue now that must be addressed from so many different angles, and the guests that I'll bring on tonight will help us do that. We're going to start tonight with a new friend of ours from West Virginia. This is Reverend Matthew J. Watts. He's a native of Mount Hope, West Virginia, and he's served as senior pastor and teacher of the Grace Bible Church in Charleston, West Virginia since 1994. In 1997, he established the Hope Community Development Corporation, which is a nonprofit organization that has the mission of empowering the west side of Charleston inner city through spiritual renewal, housing, education, employment and training, and economic development. That's a comprehensive approach. We believe at Operation Restoration that everything we do now must be comprehensive. We no longer have the luxury to pick and choose or to lay waste in symbolism. We've got to be about the business of progress. And so my first guest tonight, Pastor Watts, who's also the co-host of the national podcast, Postulating Solutions with Preachers, which I had the great pleasure of being on a few months back. He'll be joined later as well with his good friend and co-host, Pastor John P. Perkins of Jackson, Mississippi. But we'll start tonight with Pastor Watts. Thank you so much for being here.
Hi, Jade Simmons. Thanks for having me.
Yes,
excited to be with you.
Of course. You know, the last time we talked, we started a conversation about the issue, of poverty and how it really is not getting the play it needs to, whether we're talking about the national media, the political conversation. And when it does get talk, it's usually a lot of lip service. And so one of the reasons we wanted to have you on tonight was because as I look at the work that you've done, it's as hands-on as you can get. Can you tell us a little bit about your approach? I know this term indigenous leadership comes up as well, but can you tell us about your approach to studying this, why this is such a passion for you?
Well, thank you, Jade. One of the reasons such a passion, I was born and raised in poverty in the southern West Virginia coal fields with my 6 siblings, and my mother and my grandmother raised us on a very meager welfare stipend. So we understand the system in terms of before there was SNAP, there was commodities, even before there were food stamps. Mm-hmm. We understand the challenges that people in poverty have because we lived it. And after being challenged and encouraged by my mother and my grandmother to really take education very seriously, because that would be a pathway out of poverty. Yeah. And we heeded that instruction. And God blessed us, and God opened up doors of opportunity for my siblings and I to move on, go to college, and be able to find gainful employment. I've never forgotten where I came from. And so after being called into the ministry and coming back to my home state some 40 years ago, I started looking at one of the most impoverished inner city neighborhoods in West Virginia, the west side of Charleston. My wife was born and raised there, and much of her family was still living there at the time. And we've since moved back into that neighborhood. And so I actually began to start to study, why is it things the way they are? Why does it not seem to change for a certain group of people? Yeah. I was amazed at what I found. Number one, that there are billions of dollars being spent every year, but no one is really held accountable for any outcomes. No one gets penalized if no one moves out of poverty. It's a major industry that we have. And so the money is spent, and most of the money spent on poor people really goes back into the economy. The people who actually run the system, who are gainfully employed, many with college degrees, and they earn wages, they buy houses, they buy cars, and they pay utilities, et cetera. That money goes back into the economy. The part that gets to the person at the end, well, they spend all their money back into the economy, but nothing really changes. So after studying, go ahead, I'm sorry.
You can't just jump over that, because we gotta go back a bit here. I'm looking at some of the guests who are watching in. Dr. Gail Jones, who's one of our healthcare advisors as well. She talks about the industry of sickness, right? Like yes. there's really a whole sickness thing that pays a lot of bills in many ways. We think of it as something that we don't want, but in terms of the economy, sickness pays. So I'm curious now, go a little bit deeper into when you say that poverty itself is a business. I don't think many people have heard it spoken about in that way. Can you expound on that?
Poverty itself, it is an industry. As in the healthcare system, we have a sick care system, is what we really have. We pay people for treating people that are sick, not if they get well necessarily. But in the case of poverty, it is designed basically to be a wealth transfer system. It's designed to take transfer payments, people's taxes, they're allocated for welfare programs, transfer that money through a bureaucratic welfare system, with probably about 60 to 70% of that money is consumed by the apparatus of the system itself. The 30% or so that gets to the end, it then sustains people basically where they are, and then they spend that money back into the economy. So it is a stimulus for the economy. The people who work in managing the welfare system, they spend much of their money on automobiles, on fuel, on clothes, on food. They spend their money. And the people who get this stipend at the end. So it's really circulated back into the economy. And I began to realize that that's the way the system was designed. I mean, many who want to see it do something differently, but that's what it really does. So I say the money is not wasted. Poor people don't burn the money. They don't send their money to the Cayman Islands. They spend the money. It's not wasted. And they spend it on the necessities of life. But the system is not moving people out of poverty. It's not breaking the cycle of systemic generational poverty. And that's what I looked at in a very in-depth way in West Virginia, and begin to realize that we're basically a microcosm of the rest of the country.
Tell us a bit more about West Virginia in particular. I know we're going to get in education tonight.
Yes.
Pastor Perkins is going to come on. We're going to talk about the role of mentorship, education. I believe that ultimately you have a couple of different lanes for this discussion, right? Of course, you have the lane of money itself. What role does money play? And then the lane of, to me, access, education, opportunity as well. You've been making some really powerful ties, these connections. I know even one with like suspensions and expulsions. Tell us what maybe is unique about the West Virginia experience, and then what is it, like you said, that makes it more of a microcosm for the rest of the nation?
There's not much that's really unique about West Virginia. One thing is that it's the only state that's 100% Appalachia. That makes it unique. And we're the only state that is predominantly rural, but we do have some small urban pockets, like where I live in Charleston, West Virginia, a twin city, Huntington, 50 miles away. And so in that regard, some differences, but we're very similar to Mississippi, for example, predominantly a rural state. The difference is our economy was not the southern economy of tobacco and cotton. Our economy was extraction. It was coal. It was cutting timber. But the same things happened. The labor was exploited. Outside state landowners owned the minerals. They mined the coals. When it played out, they left. And they left places deeply impoverished. They had a special day on MSNBC about McDowell County, West Virginia. Welch in particular has the highest percentage of people that voted for Donald J. Trump in the last election. It is one of the poorest counties in the United States of America. And they basically have given up on anything going to happen or be different there. But the similarities isn't that, like in many places, that most poor people are sustained by finances that come from the federal government. And so if you do a real interrogation of what the federal government is doing, it's not all bad, right? Otherwise, people would starve to death. They would be living outside and they would be homeless. When you look at the governmental apparatus, for example, let's take a couple of them. Housing Urban Development, HUD. The largest provider of housing for poor people in the country is the Housing Urban Development, HUD. They spend billions every year. There's the public housing units. There's the HUD Section 8 vouchers where a person can get a voucher and rent a single family house. But people talk very little about the HUD self-sufficiency program that can lead to home ownership. Most people do not realize that HUD has a program, a person who qualifies for HUD Section 8. If they can get to where they can get someone to give them a mortgage, then HUD will pay their house payment for 15 years. What will come to them as a rent will go toward their mortgage. Most people are not even aware of that. And many people are living in Section 8 housing for years, and HUD is paying the rent and they've all become a homeowner.
Wow.
The key to wealth building in this country for working people is home ownership. That's one example. The program is there. It's not publicized. People don't know about it, so not taking advantage of it.
So what is that? So for those of you who are tuning in tonight, let me help you understand what you're watching and listening to. We believe at Operation Restoration that a lot of the restoration that we need in our country, a lot of the rebuilding, will be guided by people like this gentleman here, people who are literally living out these situations, investigating from a different standpoint than maybe solely the way that an academic would research it, or solely the way that an activist would come at it, or solely a community developer. And so I think what's powerful now is that if we lean in, we have voices on the ground who are going to see things from a different angle. Somebody commented and said, I never looked at it like that, right? And that has been how our minds have been blown every day with the people that we've been partnering with, because we've come to you before we release policy. We want to know what's the real situation on the ground. So you said there are things that are not advertised,
That's correct.
that people don't know about. And there's also that way to the public. So there's a whole narrative that's drawn up for us about what poverty is, who it affects, the reasons that people are poor. You'll hear some stale narratives. Well, they're just not ready to work. They're not pulling themselves up by their bootstraps, right? Nobody even talks about whether they got boots, whether they got straps in the boots, right? So that discussion never happens. You have a whole other discussion now that's being driven in this election with things coming from the right towards the left, this battle between right and left. So if you do any programs, then that's socialism, right? Now, if you do programs that help the wealthy, we don't use that word socialism. Suddenly it's not welfare, it's bailout, right? We have a whole different language that we use. Tell us a little bit about language, narrative, and perception when it comes to poverty.
Well, one of the things is most poor adults in America are not receiving a welfare stipend or check. They are working. They're part of the working poor. Most people don't realize that.
Say that one more time.
They don't realize that. Most poor adults in the United States of America are working. The 40 million people that were in poverty before COVID-19, the 8.5 million people that dropped into poverty as a result of COVID-19 economic impact, those 48 million people, those who are adults, most of them are working. They are the working poor. Right. As a result of the Welfare Reform Act of 1996 under William Jefferson Clinton, it puts a lifetime cap on how much people can receive in terms of cash payment from the government. That's the number one thing. The second thing that is not really realized is that many poor people fell into poverty, and our poverty rate is linked to mechanization, technological improvements that sent many jobs, and globalization. It's millions of jobs went overseas, right? And many other jobs were eliminated. West Virginia may be, I think, the third leading producer of coal in the United States of America. We produce coal with a fraction of the coal miners that we produced when my father was a coal miner 60, 70 years ago because of mechanization. So the economy has shifted. Jobs have left this country, robotics, technology, computers. So now we have a surplus of labor that is undereducated and underskilled. And that's why we send so many people to prison, is to manage this surplus of labor, because we've shifted jobs into the prison industrial complex. And so those people who run the prisons, many of them people would not have anything to do if there wasn't prison for them to manage, because we don't need them at the automobile industry and the steel mills, et cetera. So this is what people don't really understand that's happened. Just quickly a statistic. In 1970s, right, America had about 19 million people working in manufacturing. Today we have about 12 million, a difference of 7 million people. In 1970, we had 300,000 people in prison in the United States of America. Today we got 2.3 million. In 1970, we had over 3.5 million people in the military. Today we got 1.5 million. 2 million people less in the military, 2 million people increase in prison. 7 million people less that's working in manufacturing. 7 million people more that's a part of being under correctional control. So people don't really understand, and that greatly impacts the poor. And secondly, the prison system, the criminal justice system, it perpetuates poverty because offenders do not come uniformly from the society.
Right.
They come predominantly from poor areas.
Mm-hmm.
And so when they are released, they go back to those areas.
That's right.
So now the whole area is suppressed because they can be legally discriminated and denied employment opportunities. Mm-hmm. All these things are connected together. And people fail to realize it is the what has happened, the outmigration of people from certain areas and the jobs moving out of these areas, and it left behind desolate places. They're literally economically desolate. And it's going to take a reinvestment in the people and in the place where they live. Okay. And that's what people need to realize.
Wow. You know, there's so much in this. I'm watching the comments come in as well. You know, these are the things that we feel have to be brought forth in terms of having now a real discussion that sheds light. You know how we believe the stuff that's been in the dark has to come in the light. And I believe this is the season for that. What we've done is we've allowed politicians, partisanship to feed us narratives that are only a fraction of the story. And so what's powerful to me is to hear the interconnected links. This is what people don't see. They make something a law and order issue when it's not. It's like the tip of the iceberg. Is really the last thing is law and order. But that access to opportunity is something I want to bring in. I'm going to bring up now Pastor John P. Perkins into the discussion with us, because this is a good segue to talk about the role of opportunity and mentorship. Pastor Perkins, good to see you. He is pastor at Common Ground Covenant Church. He's going to discuss with us his work in addressing poverty in Jackson, Mississippi, and his organization's success in implementing the Talks Mentorship Program in West Jackson, Mississippi. You've been listening backstage. We've been promising to have this discussion. One of the things that we do at Operation Restoration is keep it real. And so if you could just start by telling us the realities of what you've seen and the power of the mentorship programs in the schools that you've been in.
Well, Talks mentoring is it's an acronym for transferring a little knowledge systematically. And it was through Talks mentoring that I had the chance and the privilege to meet Reverend Pastor Matthew J. Watts, and who is now my colleague, but always my mentor. And in the schools now for, I would say, over 14 years, started by my aunt, and then I got a chance to continue the work within the local public school here. The first thing that I was able to see was the fact that the results of our children having mentors coming in to see them was that they were encouraged in a way in which they could see what they could be, in a way that they could dream dreams that they had never dreamed before. And nevertheless, their attendance went up, their character and behavior went up, their grade levels went up, one whole letter grade. All those who were in the Talks mentoring program, usually every year we had the success. Some years we had the success of 1.5 grade levels going up. It was this type of energy that kept us coming back every year. The mentors wanting to come back every year, and the school demanding that we continue to come back every year. This being COVID-19 being the first year that we have not been within the school, and this is really a travesty that we haven't had the opportunity to be there and be with the students, but we all understand our circumstances.
Mm-hmm. what we're doing now, for those of you who are just joining, we're having this broad discussion about poverty. We're taking a comprehensive approach as much as we can within the hour. And Pastor Perkins is here to bring in this important angle now of education, the role of education, but also mentorship. That's different. That's different, because especially when you still got to fix education, you definitely can't just depend on education. The mentorship piece really falls into me, the lane of vision, because what you just described is the power of proximity. When we were offline, you were talking about the kids in school seeing the graduates at Jackson State, seeing, going, oh my gosh, wait a minute, I know you live right around here next to me, and you're in college, and you're saying that you can see, but if you don't see yourself in them, we know what happens without vision. Talk a bit about the role of vision, proximity for people in poverty to be able to see what else is possible.
I can tell you from an adult perspective as well, and this leads back to the children. 41-year-old man whom I'm his junior in age, but his senior as far as his pastor and as his mentor and leader. And he told me something. He told me I spent most of my life in prison.
Wow. And
when he said that, it was this repetitive story, right? Because the first time that I did talks mentoring, I saw this young man who basically was telling the story of how his father was in prison, how he probably was going to end up in prison, and how the very fact that if you 16% of the children who are suspended are likely to wind up incarcerated. Okay. Right. And so we are ground zero, being the fact that we are the third most highest incarcerated state in the union, right? And with some of the harshest laws that you ever did see, that would throw a young person behind bars at the age of 12 and being tried as an adult. Okay. And so this young man saying, I spent half of my life behind bars, right? And him saying basically he learned to read in prison, him learning to do these things, and him just needing an opportunity to have a job, right? And so as it relates, I'm seeing this child at one point that could be this man in the future, right? And I'm saying, how do we stop this from happening to this young child, right? When he says, when I continue to come to the school and he doesn't have clean clothes, and they miss because of the lights wasn't on, and so on and so forth. We're dealing with poverty at an alarming rate. And the school, okay, the school is the most stable environment within the community. Okay, the school is the most stable environment within the community. It's the place where they know they can get a hot meal, at least 2 hot meals, right? Mm-hmm. And a snack, right? It's the place where the parents know that their children are going to be looked after for at least most of the day, so on and so forth. And so when we talk about this as far as education is concerned, we understand that the dollars are tied to whether or not our students are in school, right? And our students are there and they are attending, right? And so they just, at some point want the seats, the butts in the seats. Yeah. But we want our children to be educated, but we also want them to be educated fairly. And we also want them to have the things that they need, the tools that they need to be educated. And so it makes for us as mentors going into the school to see the conditions in which our children are being educated and know that we have to do something about it, that we have to fight harder, right, and do more.
So Jade, if I can just make this one quick comment, just quickly, about this idea of vision and proximity, and I'll do what we preachers do, and you are one of us, Pastor John, and my sister's coming on later. Just
That's
simply
right.
this, John 1:14, and the word became flesh and pitched a tent among us, and we beheld his glory.
Yes,
The glory is the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth.
That's
Jesus
good.
Christ is the quintessential example of making himself in close proximity to humanity, that they might behold him and be transformed by his presence among them. And I think that we can inspire young people, and those of us who know the living Christ, they can be inspired by what they see coming in and through us. And that's why this mentoring is so critically important for this generation of young people.
Absolutely.
You know, one of the things we faced when we first launched the campaign, because I've been open about, you know, my faith, I didn't think it was something that you should hide. It's supposed to be a country of religious freedom, right? So I also wanted to draw a very strong contrast between what I feel has paraded as faith, and in many ways has been religious manipulation, or propaganda, or scripture taken out of context. And what the way that faith has come into play for us is not that my role as president is to proselytize the nation. Right. But where the inspiration has been is when we've created policy, we've asked the question, how close can we get to all the different types of humans and serve them where we are? And, you know, my motto was, you know, as a follower of Christ, my motto was, wait, how did he treat the poor? How did he treat the guilty? You know, so when you go, as a policy break right here, because if you haven't noticed, tonight for me is about really sharing the spotlight. I'm a chronic student, so I'm just over here geeking out over stats and facts and case studies. But if you want to understand where Operation Restoration stands on the issue of how to build a pathway out of poverty, you're going to visit Jade Simmons 2020, operationrestoration2020.com. Either one of those will get you there. You'll see policy that already addresses many of the things that we're talking about here. If you want to see stuff that's focusing on green, you'll see policy talking about the need to raise the minimum wage. How can we still be at $7.25 an hour federally since 2009? And if you think that's the Democrats' fault or the Republican fault, I got news for you. That rate has been the same through two different administrations, one red and one blue, right? So these are real discussions. When you talk about the industry, right, of poverty, that welfare reform must happen so that people can actually get off of the system and be able to build into something new. You'll see us talking about vision in our education reform, criminal justice reform. We believe you can't demand people be productive members of society and then put up all sorts of roadblocks to stop them from being able to do just that. So visit the website, you'll see policy. Specifically, it's called Building a Pathway Out of Poverty, that focuses on these issues. But I want to bring in our last guest with us, and backstage, keep everyone on screen. I think it'll be a nice full conversation to keep us all here. We'll make room for Dr. Ollie Watts Davis, who I know I have something in common with. He's a fellow musician as well. I think I heard somebody told me that you can sing maybe a mean aria. But I were just blessed.
A proud brother told you that.
Yeah, proud brother. Glad you out there. Dr. Ollie Watts Davis is the Suzanne and William Allen Distinguished Professor of Music, Professor of Voice and Music Director, and conductor of the Black Chorus at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. She's also an author, a composer, a recording artist, and the recipient of numerous awards for teaching and leadership. She's named a University Scholar in 2008. Professor Davis is currently serving as a Provost Fellow for the campus-wide Student Success Initiative. Welcome, 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 Dr. Davis. Thank you for being here. I know you're going to broaden the discussion with us around education as well, and maybe even throw in a little bit about the power of the arts, where it comes to really stimulating people and helping them find passion and purpose. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, first of all, I want to thank you so much for having me. It's really a delight to be here. And before I go any further, I must ask my elder brother if I may speak.
Yes, you may. Yes, you may.
Okay. So having gained his permission, I shall advance. I'm so, again, just heartened by the conversation. I am a musician. I'm a mother. I'm a teacher. I'm a sister. I'm an aunt. I'm a grandmother, a proud grandmother. And I'm just delighted that we have this space, that you've afforded us this opportunity. I've been inspired by what has been said already and hope that I can add just a few things to it. I liked so much the phrase power of proximity. My husband, the Reverend Dr. Harold D. Davis, that's my hero, y'all, and my boyfriend. So he wrote the curriculum. He's the creator of the Talks Mentoring Leadership Program. And you know, he was someone to observe what was in front of him, being a servant of God and wanting to address the needs that he saw in front of him. So he was serving as an assistant pastor and youth pastor at a church here in Urbana, and had developed this beautiful program called the Love Triangle, believing that students would benefit from the support of family and church and school, because he's also a music educator and a wonderful musician, a practicing musician as well. And so he would go into the local schools and he would talk about our students, and he would talk to the administrators and say, if there's any difficulty with our students, please call me. You know, don't put them in detention, don't suspend them. I'm their advocate, and I'm going to activate all the resources that they need, that they would need to be successful in the school, realizing that you cannot be educated if you're not at school. Realizing that one thing that we have needed as a people since our existence here is to be educated and recognize that all of our freedom is in our ability to be educated and to use that. So after some years of serving as an assistant pastor, he recognized, after going to a school board meeting, that the number of suspensions of Black students to the number of suspensions of white students was just astronomically different. There was no equity there. For every one white student, who was suspended, there were 7 Black boys suspended. So he said, the house is on fire. We are in crisis mode, and no one is calling the fire department. And so, being the activist that he is, he decided that he would then put his skill sets together. He would go in with his personality. You know, he doesn't meet a stranger, and he's always teaching. And he would use his lived experience as well as his learned experience to impact the lives of these children. So his first entree was to go in, and he mentored 7 Black boys. Well, you know, the need was great. So the second year, he pulled 3 of his preacher friends together, and they were mentoring 21 boys. And that third year, he was pulling in more of his pastor friends, and they were mentoring over 30 young men. And so he knew that he was onto something, because as my brother John has stated, those who participating in this program, it hadn't been actually formalized at the time, but they were reaping benefit from just the interaction, you know. So he decided to manualize what he was doing. And so he started writing it down. He wrote the Talks Mentoring Curriculum. And then it only took a human being to enter the space and who could make a difference, because he had put the principles, he had manualized them, they were written down. And so all we needed was to get a personality. So we wanted to personalize the principles and put personality to them so we could activate them in the lives of children. Well, you would believe that now we have the boys up and running, and someone says, what about the girls? So he recruits me to write the mentoring curriculum for the girls. And so I went in, being the researcher that I am.
His girlfriend.
I just can't write without meaning. So I volunteered at a local middle school, and I would go in and I would meet with the young girls, and I would hear what their concerns were, and I would go home at night and I would write a response to their concerns. And then so after doing that for a number of months, I wrote the female curriculum. And so we have the Talks curriculum for boys and the Talks mentoring curriculum for girls. And as has already been stated, it is transferring a little knowledge systematically. So it is a system. It is a very deliberate, intentional pathway, okay, to use your phrase. It's a pathway out of a certain circumstance. It's a pathway out of a certain sense of injustice, marginalization, and disenfranchisement. It's a pathway out of miseducation, undereducation, and out of poverty. So that's just my sort of opening remark.
No, that's powerful.
We can talk about it.
I love it. I love it. What's exciting for me is I'm always listening for confirmation, right? That we're doing the right thing and on the right path. And when all the discussion was centered around systemic injustice, systemic racism, that word kept coming back. What I kept hearing was the only way to defeat something that was systemic is to build in something systematic. So to hear you talk about that systematic approach now, that's the way that I feel we have to all begin to operate now. When we break these issues down, what are the systems and steps we have to take to not just put a Band-Aid on the issue or symbolism on the issue? We see now the discussion should be about criminal justice reform, law enforcement reconstruction, and it gets shifted to maybe taking a statue down, maybe taking Aunt Jemima off the shelf, maybe holding up fists in solidarity. Well, that's level one, right? That's the symbolism that at the end of the day, it doesn't yield us any real fruit or results on the other side that will benefit people currently suffering under these systemic issues. Let me back up and say one thing. This is late in the game, 42 minutes in the game. And because all of my guests are African-American, I need to especially say this. While we are talking about issues that disproportionately affect African-American, poverty does not discriminate. And being in West Virginia, especially, I know, Pastor Watts, you can give us some stats. I think I remember when you were telling me about expulsion and suspension. This is a part of the narrative that I think also must be cleared up because it is used against us. And we're watching Black and white be pitted against each other, when in reality, when you look at the way that poverty affects us, those should be groups that are bonding together. The coal workers in West Virginia who are dying of Black lung disease, voting one way, thinking it was going to save them, and it hasn't. The farmers who are now facing bankruptcy, who have been martyrs in the current administration. This is not just a Black issue. And so I want to make sure I say that so people understand it. Pastor Watts, can you speak a little bit too about that, the fact that that poverty transcends color lines?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Absolutely transcend. You asked me earlier what's unique about West Virginia. One of the things unique about West Virginia is that we are the least diverse state in the United States. So the African American population in West Virginia is only 3.6%. Right? So if you look at all of the areas, for example, suspension from schools, African Americans are disproportionately suspended from school. But whites make up 90% of all the kids suspended from school. White students make up 90% of all the kids suspended from school. And so even though Africans are disproportionately affected, and that's why here in West Virginia, we've been trying to make the case, don't marginalize the voice that happens to be coming from a Black body. We're talking about poverty. We're talking about marginalization. We're talking about systematic perpetuation of the exploitation of poor people. And we're talking about really the lack of development of the one resource that we need to have developed. If you want to understand West Virginia, it's one thing you can do. One assignment. Just Google the mine wars. It's about the coal mine wars in West Virginia in the 1920s. My grandfather was a coal miner during that period of time in 1920. Literally, there was wars waged in the southern West Virginia coal fields when we are come to keep the coal miners bound to those rural neighborhoods where the coal operators controlled the schools, they controlled the churches, they controlled the company store, they controlled everything. And literally, the miners had to take up arms to try to free themselves from that indentured servitude. Well, the point that's made there is that the coal operators segregated the coal miners by race in their housing to try to keep them from coming together, keep them from forming labor unions to be able to resist the oppression. It is incredibly documented in a most recent documentary that tells that story. And that's what's happened all over America historically. There have been the elite that have tried to pit poor, marginalized people against each other based on race, based on ethnicity, to try to convince those of the lighter hue that they in some way were better than those that were darker. And if the darker group made some progress, it would take something away from them.
Yeah.
And so we were in this thing together, these 40 million plus another 8 or 10 million people that are poor in this country. And they have to come together and work together and challenge the system together in a creative way if we're going to move this group forward. And we need this group to move forward. The United States of America needs this group.
Yeah,
we need their intellect. We need their minds. We need their skills. We need their ability. We need their youth, particularly in West Virginia, where we're the oldest state in the union and one of the most unhealthy states in the union. And so we got a lot of things. Only one of two states with a lost population.
Yeah,
it's West Virginia. So these are all factors that are affecting us. But lastly, what we're trying to do here is to create a template that can be used nationwide.
okay.
The 3,150 some odd counties in the United States of America, they are more alike than they are different when it comes to what poor people are dealing with. And every county in the country has to be the same in that it has to have the apparatus to receive money from the federal government.
Okay.
And that's what makes everything so similar, or more than what people realize. The federal government forces every place to have a similar structure of politics, of government, so they can receive federal money that the federal government sends down to the states. And we did an analysis of what's happening in West Virginia, and that almost 45% of all the money spent on poor people, it comes from the federal government. And that's no different in any other state. Most of the money comes from the federal government. You look at HUD housing, you look at Medicaid, you look at Medicare, you look at TANF, you look at SNAP, even education is subsidized from the federal government. The workforce investment, almost all of it comes from the federal government. But the federal government doesn't have an apparatus to ensure that programs are efficiently and effectively run at the community level. And that's where everything falls off the rails.
That's right. That's right. We got a thing. Pastor Watson, I have a thing is we stack an inefficiency on top of inefficiency. Yeah, but if I could share something, as we Pastor Watts, I'm only doing what Pastor Watts has taught me to do, and has sprung off a little of myself, and as like a chef by trade, just been, working with the recipe, you know what I mean? And so one of the things that I'm doing that might be a little bit different is social enterprise development, right? Yeah. And so as we are doing this and working with the economy, I think the grandfather of Black history had it right, Dr. Carter G. Woodson. He said, Black people, and specifically, right, can't get their hands clean enough for Black people, right? And so what we have here is this dichotomy between being oppressed and marginalized, as well as the situation that we and the way in which we view ourselves, and the economy that we're not able to build in and with ourselves, and our ability to work together. And so, our inability to work together. And so, boom, there goes the dynamite in regards to us being able to help one another in the way that it should look today. And so, our ability to do a Black Wall Street, or even our ability to boycott and for any longer period of time than 20 minutes.
Don't get me started.
For any longer period of time than 20 minutes, or to go without what is that, Pastor Wise? To go without Starbucks coffee.
Oh yeah, I can't.
Not gonna happen.
Is that going to happen? You know what I mean? Are we going to go without? Are we going to go with? Are we willing to do anything that takes some real suffering and true dedication? And so that's really where the question lies. If we're going to do something to help people get out of poverty, it's going to be. And I'm the preacher, right? I'm a young preacher. I can't say the old preacher. You know, my mother was the one who helped me to understand that you have to ask the question, do you love your neighbors? You love yourself. Yeah. Are you your brother's keeper? That's what she started with. You are your own brother's keeper, right? And so in moving that to the question that we must learn to ask one another, do we want for our neighbor the very same thing we want for ourselves? If we want that, then we should want a great education for our young people. Then we should want a good job that pays a living wage for those who are around us. And then we should be willing to work towards it in such a way that we can. I know all of us can't do everything, but we can all do something.
That's good. I want to talk a bit about solutions as we begin to round out. That's important. And I want to come back to Dr. Davis to start with that. You know, I always say we keep it real, and you dropped in a whole nother hour-long conversation right there, John, on the topic of, you know, how we handle each other. And I could speak an hour by myself on that from my experience over the past 10 months for sure. Sure. But what I've found has been powerful to focus on is to be able to envision what do we as a nation, right? Again, broadening this discussion, even though we have a focus here on an African American community, but we've already said it, poverty transcends color lines.
Absolutely.
As we talk about solutions, Dr. Davis, what gives you hope in terms of what you have seen, the outcomes that you have seen with hands-on, the power of proximity, mentorship, ministry? We have all of that in common as well. What gives you hope? And maybe if there were one solution you'd like to see implemented, either whether it's the federal level, the local, state level, or the community level, what is it you have hope in? Oh, wait, we're going to make sure we unmute you. I don't want to miss anything you say. All right, let's see. All right, there you are.
Young people give me hope. Every day I go to my studio, or I'm having a Zoom session with an aspiring young artist, or I'm standing in front of my choir, and their eagerness, their passion, their commitment, their concern for one another, I believe that they need to be led well. And as I admonish them, they need to be present. The students who are leading a lot of the protests, this is their moment. And I want for them to see it through, though, to a good end. We need to teach them, you know, to love mercy, to do justly, to walk humbly. We need to teach them to steward any influence that they have. What gives me hope is when we have these type of conversations and we challenge those who are listening, that we can start where we are, use what we have, and do what we can. And that we have a responsibility to do that. And also that we find someone that we can pour our lives into. You know, it would be tragic for me to have been raised in Mount Hope, West Virginia, to have survived Jim Crow, segregation, to have survived the civil rights movement, to have survived, you know, all of this, and not have someone that I have poured into who understands the struggle and who's committed to acting justly and to using their voice for somebody else. So what gives me hope is that I have this privilege of working with young people every day, and I can pour into their lives. And then I can write about it, I can sing about it, I can conduct about it, I can address what's happening in my community and what's happening in the world. I can use the platform that I've been given to make a difference and to make a change. And I've written a solution, because I believe very strongly that the Talks Mentoring curriculum, that leadership program, the time is right for it now. We wrote it over 20 years ago. It was so far ahead of its time. Yep, it's had a tremendous run, but I believe that the world is is looking for that now. So I'm just hoping that we can get it out there, we can share it so that people can understand it, and that people can embrace it and realize that it really can help other people. See, everyone is involved everyone is helped, who gets involved in the Talks program. It's written to be user-friendly, and it's also written so that the mentors can complete some of their incompleted passages. It makes them think about some things that maybe they weren't taught. Maybe they didn't get those things. And before they go into that situation with those young people, they have some time to think about it. And then they can come up with they can postulate their own positive solutions, So, I mean, I'm hopeful because I'm optimistic, hope is out in front of me, and I'm chasing and following hard after it. And because I know that God is out there and he's waiting for me, I think things are going to be all right.
Oh, wow. We got too many pastors on this line tonight. We'll have to take offering before we get off of here. Dr. Davis, what I love about that and what John said before you, what you're causing us to have to focus on now is the way that we have been focusing on each other, the way that politics has us focusing on each other is in a negative light. It has us looking for what's wrong with all the other groups. What's wrong with them? Why won't they do this? And John, what you're actually asking us to do, when I think of the way we've been telling voters, what if this is the time that you vote? And when you go to the polls, it's not about, let me cast my vote for me. What is it that I need for me and my four? What if we now begin to vote in a way that says, listen, I know how we function over here. I got bootstraps. I'm going to pull myself up. My kids are provided for. We've got what we need. What if I give my vote now? If I free my vote from just being the thing that represents me and what I want, what if I dare to have a vote that I cast for what others might also need? That to me is the beginning of a new era, when even we free the way that we go to the polls, not as this almost stingy, I got to hold on to what I got, make sure they don't get it. But you know what? What can my vote possibly prosper in someone else in this season? And so it gives me hope to hear the conversation begin to shift now. Like Pastor Watts was saying, when you help these other groups, everybody is helped. It's a spiritual principle. It's a law of nature that when you help what is failing, where there are cracks in the foundation, when you lift that up, everybody rises. And even in that example, Dr. Davis, any of us out here who've ever mentored, I mean, even with me and my younger sister, or now with my own kids, I get more excited when they achieve than when I win anything. It's I have a wall full of accolades, right? That I was very proud to gather and go get. But I get more joy now in my kids' report cards, or when my sister sings the national anthem somewhere. Like I feel like I'm good. Heaven forbid if my time were to end on this earth earlier than I planned, I know I can go because of what you said. I've poured, right? So can we now move into an era where being a powerhouse is not about building our own platforms, but being a powerhouse is about pouring power into those that we are privileged to serve. So thank you for your service as well. Every day, the type of service you're doing. Pastor Perkins, Watts, I'm going to come to you at the end. Pastor Perkins, what's the solution? What's something that's giving you hope that you're excited about?
Oh, you just said a mouthful. You just preached my favorite text. That's Luke chapter 10, the Good Samaritan text, which is Leviticus 19 exegeted. The man didn't care who it was who came to help him. The priest came by, the Levite came by, looked over at the man and didn't help him. The man didn't care that it was a dirty, greasy mutt of a Samaritan, who Jesus showed himself in the Samaritan when he says, whatever more you spend, I will repay upon my return. How many of you know my Jesus is coming back? Anyway, I'm not gonna do all that. but listen, what's giving me hope right now is the fact is really you all, be honest with you. Um, for you to run for president, for Mark Charles to run for president, for Dr. Ollie Davis to get on here and to stand up tonight and to speak, for me to work with Pastor Watts. I can say like Elijah, I'm out here by myself, Lord, I'm out here by myself. And the Lord said, boy, what you talking about? There's 7 haven't bowed to Baal.
Yeah.
And there is some real saints and some real soldiers and some real foot soldiers that have not bowed to Baal, that truly care about what happens to other people. And in light of what you just shared, is really the only people that we really ever celebrate in the people who are immortalized are the people who gave their life to someone else. Mother Teresa, she gave her life. Malcolm X gave his life.
Yeah.
Dr. Martin Luther King gave his life. The people who are immortalized, the people who we idolize, are the ones who did something for someone else. Why? It's because it's hard to do. And so I think you all are the one that give me hope and to continue to inspire me, so I can continue to put my legs on my jeans on one leg at a time. You know what I mean? And not put on that 3-piece suit. Ain't that right? Ain't that right, Pastor Watts?
Right.
Not put on that 3-piece. Huh?
I'm with you. I'm with you.
And become an essential worker in this day where the church is not attractive.
Wow. There's a lot of comments about solidarity, and Marcus Boyd, a really enlightened comment here. He says, as a nation, the solution to America is to stop letting the system divide us by race, by gender, culture, party, and economic class. He said he admits it's easier said than done. It'll take a round table from all backgrounds to do so. Poverty has touched every place on the earth. Yet America, the symbol of poverty here is Black, the symbol of poor is Black. So it's easy to point the finger at a symbol. And I think that what he just said can be applied across the board. It's easy to point the finger at a Democrat, point the finger at a Republican, point the finger at Black, point the finger at white. And what does it look like now when we have this unique moment in time that I do fear we're wasting to symbolism, where you finally have universal buy-in that a lot of these systemic injustices exist. I hate to see us squander that now in talk. I'm going to end with you, Pastor Watts, but let me let everybody else watching know, as much as I love to have good conversation, it does nothing if you don't propose solutions. We challenge you to do your due diligence. Go to jadesimmons2020.com. Look at the solutions we propose. It's good to have these roundtables and discussions. These are the types of minds that we are pulling from and will be pulling from into the future. People who are living this out, living in the communities they're talking about, and really doing this work, going into the schools and seeing the hope that still abounds for us. So we're excited about being able to partner with people like our guest tonight. Thank you all for being on. I want to end with Reverend Watts. Tell us what you have hope for. You got a whole encyclopedia in that brain of yours in terms of statistics and numbers. I would imagine it could be overwhelming, daunting to actually know the realities of the number. Most of us talk about these things. We don't have the facts and the figures like you do. The facts and the figures that you have don't bode well. How does someone like you, who knows the ins and the outs, the realities, the complications, how does someone like you maintain hope, and where is it that you see hope? And is there kind of one major solution you feel we need to start stepping forward?
Well, the great Brian Stevenson said that we must remain hopeful because hopelessness is the enemy of justice. We will never achieve justice if we become hopeless because we give up and we will not continue to put forth the effort and make the necessary sacrifices. I think the one of the things that gives me real hope is the resiliency of the children in my neighborhood. I live in the most challenged neighborhood in West Virginia, highest crime rate, the highest domestic violence rate. Only 5% of our children live in a family with their mother and their father. Shootings are commonplace in a little city in Charles, but these children are still hopeful. They're still trying and putting forth an effort. We still produce the best youth football and basketball teams anywhere. There's something they know and understand. And I tell people often, if we can produce the best youth football team and basketball team, we can produce some scholars. In my first life, I was an engineer. That's my love for numbers and figures and analyzing things. And I was an engineer for over 20 years. I remember one of the great engineers of history in the United States was Charles F. Kettering. He was a brilliant engineer with General Motors, all type of patents. And Kettering once said that a problem well defined is a problem half solved. And I heard that as a young engineering student and applied it all the way through engineering school, even to the present day. If I spend enough time really trying to define the problem, I got to postulate a solution to a problem that is well defined. And that I believe that the answer to every problem is in the problem. That's what physics taught me. That's what chemistry taught me, is that everything I needed was there in the problem itself. I had to get the right equation, the right formula, and then take stuff out of that problem and place it in that formula to solve the problem. So I've given the last 25 of my years in West Virginia trying to figure it out, trying to define the problem, to study every single system in the state as to why it continues to press down heavily upon poor people and nothing really changes. And I don't want to be arrogant. I think I've really figured it out. And I stayed here sometime against the chagrin of my family. Why would you stay in that place?
I don't know if people caught that. You said you live in.
I live on the west side of Charleston, physically.
You volunteer in. You lived in. You don't have to live there.
I could have followed her to Champaign.
So why do you live there?
Let me tell you why I live there. A really main reason. Yes, it's the call of God, a sense of a call of God to a place and to a group of people. But it also roots back to my childhood. And my sister can testify to this. We were born to a single mother. She had 7 children. We lived in one of the raggedest houses in the neighborhood, and we moved to the projects to have indoor plumbing. We thought we were like George Jefferson.
Wow.
But let me tell you something about that experience. My grandmother and my mother made us feel every day like the sun rose because it was time for us to get up. And when the sun set, it was time for us to lay down. The school teachers in that segregated W. Du Bois Elementary School at the end of the paved road that sit inside the hill were the best minds that our community produced. And they poured everything in us that they had, as well as the minister at the church and people in the neighborhood. So we've been the recipients of all of this nurture, of all this mentorship, all this stuff poured inside of us. And I really felt that God called me to stay in West Virginia among these people, give my best I had to give right here. And if it pleased him, to just very possibly, that the people who sat in great darkness would see a great light. And maybe this Nazareth of Galilee that they call West Virginia, the brunt of jokes. Former Vice President Dick Cheney said they still marrying their cousins down there. They make fun of us all the time, right? But I believe that out of this place, that maybe God can do something special.
Wow.
And I hope to be a part of it, live long enough, but I certainly tried to write it all down. If I'm not around, maybe someone can move it forward. And so that gives me hope. I still believe that God does not call the mighty, the powerful, the supernatural, but it pleases God to choose the weak things, the base things, those things that seem to be insignificant and nothing, to bring to nothing those things that are. And I just want to be a part of some great move of God. And I share this with you, candidate Jade. I told John. John said, well, who is this young woman? I said, I don't know, but I believe she's going somewhere. I said, John, she's going somewhere. And if I can lend my support to elevate her voice nationally, her voice needs to be heard. I've listened to her speak. I've listened to some of her tape. I've had a conversation with her. This is a voice that needs to be heard around this country. So I appreciate this opportunity to have this conversation with you. And I believe that God is doing something, just bringing the 4 of us together. And those who may be listening to this conversation. Yeah. I close with this old preacher told me one time, He said, I keep saying, well, somebody need to do this,
Yeah.
and somebody need to do that, and somebody do. He said, well, whatever you find somebody, tell them, Cole, I got some work for somebody to do. But until then, why don't you look in the mirror?
Yeah.
And if you need to, why don't you give yourself the nickname somebody? So stop.
Yeah.
So to do the work. So we're the somebodies, Candid Jade. We're the somebodies. I believe that God is looking forward to maybe bring about the restoration that you have the vision to see happen in this country.
Wow.
So God bless you, and we hope to
Amen.
stay connected with
Amen.
you. And when you be up for the inauguration, we'll be there. Just let us in the room. You know.
Seats ready. We got
now,
Right,
I got a social distance now.
all right. Your
Right.
class ready. Listen, you didn't get to see her tonight. My vice presidential running mate, a brilliant, absolutely brilliant woman, Claudelia J. Rose. I'll make way for you to be able to meet her later. I know all of you would really, really enjoy her. But one of the things that we wanted to be connected to people who were really doing the work. And so I wanted you to talk about why you live where you live. We have tried to run a campaign that feels like it comes from the people, that it's literally amongst the people. We don't like even the term, we're running for the people. You know, that felt condescending to me. To me, it had to be with. What would it look like to run with the people? So we are honored, blessed, humbled, privileged that people are seeing that in us and hearing that in the voice that we're lifting. And it is that very story you told about somebody that is the reason I'm doing this right now, because I got tired of hearing myself going, why don't they do this? Why don't they say this? They should just, and after a while, your own voice starts to grate on your ears and you go, shut up and do something, right? So sure. This is us doing something. And what we're excited about, Claudelia and I both say, we can't go around saying we have a vision and on November 4th, we will be in 1600. It's not like that. The only thing we were called to do was to say yes to this moment. So we felt like we won as soon as we said yes. And then after we said yes, we got vision, right? Different vision for the nation, different vision for the impoverished, for Native Americans, for small business owners. That started to come in the form of these divine downloads. But what we felt sure about was no matter what, life will never be the same. And part of that is because of the people like Dr. Davis, like Pastor Perkins, Reverend Watts, who we've met now. We can't unsee what we have seen, whether it's the corruption we found in government, which that's a whole other conversation, whether it's these industries of sickness and poverty that we are finding out for ourselves. We can't go back to just being citizens who can say, I didn't know that was going on. And so we thank you for the roles you played in opening many people's eyes so that we see things differently, and especially for allowing us to still have hope, right, Dr. Davis, that every day we can do this hard work, see the hard circumstances, see the darkness, and still decide to be light and to be salt. So thank you all for that. Thank you for joining us tonight. And I am so proud that this is the last town hall that we had, because to me, it's fulfilling the promise that we wanted to make sure no stone was left unturned, and that people who are normally left out of the discussion, demographics that are normally ignored, would be given spotlight. So we are excited to talk about what the possibilities are for helping people build a pathway out of poverty. Thank you all so much for joining me tonight.
Thank you. And after this election is over, I'm not going to share it now. I got a big idea for you and Dr. Davis. It's a big idea.
I smell Mozart in our future, Dr. Davis. I smell Mozart or Rachmaninoff. I'll get my books out. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Bless you.
Have a good
night. Bless you, baby sister. All right, Pastor John.
Thank you.